The next morning, Simon came to the port where their ship was supposed to be. He was amazed at how many things were around him, but most of all he was impressed by the passengers. Everyone had their own unique style. He thought that they made him seem the most ordinary person here. But when he heard that the ship to Kizen was leaving soon, he quickly hurried to get there. Lorraine had told him yesterday that she would be taking a different route to the island, so the next time they would see each other would be at school. Simon handed his ticket to the ticket taker. And while he was checking his ticket, Simon began to look around the ship. It was big and beautiful, but it was moored with its bow to the shore, whereas they usually did the opposite. Meanwhile, the ticket taker confirmed that his ticket was fine and he could go through. Simon thanked him. But before he could get on the ship, a noise distracted him. Someone was yelling and proving to someone that something was wrong. It was another young man shouting at another ticket taker at another entrance to the ship. He was arguing that he was number 1 on the waiting list, and how could it be that no one gave him an invitation? Is this how they do things in Kizen? The guy was very angry and started clenching his fists. He was shouting to get in touch with Casanova, because it was some kind of mistake. Someone standing next to Simon said that this happens every year. There are always kids like this one who can't accept the results. But still, he is number 1 on the waiting list and he must be very sorry. The boy did not calm down. He shouted that he was Lucius Carroll, heir to a county in the Kingdom of Dresden. He demanded to contact the headquarters, and that was an order. The ticket taker asked him to leave because he was not on the list of accepted students. Lucius' teeth clenched at this statement. He was furious. He grabbed the poor ticket taker by the hair and was about to hit him, saying how dare he. But someone grabbed his arm. Simon smiled at him and asked him to stop. Lucius screamed, "Who is he? Let him go right now." Simon looked at him with a murderous look and squeezed his arm hard, making it crackle. Lucius screamed in pain. He turned to Simon, saying that he must be looking for an easy death if he dared to do such a thing. But someone was already rushing to them, asking what was going on. A gray-haired man in a strict suit was walking toward them, tapping his cane. It was Professor Siage. Their quarrel immediately stopped and everyone looked at the professor. He asked Lucius if he had any last words. He quickly stood up and began to ask him to contact Nephthys urgently. The professor knew that he was first on the waiting list, but he also knew the result of his application and that he was not selected. And the professor was about to snap his fingers with an expressionless face. And he snapped them, asking Lucius if he thought he could get away with that kind of behavior. And blood spurted from the poor fool. After that, leaving him in a pool of blood, the professor said that they didn't have time and all students should get on board. And then he personally addressed Simon, saying that he should also get on board. He couldn't help but agree. Professor Siage was the first aboard, while the students began to whisper that it was bloody black magic. They wondered if the first graders could also take the class. Simon felt sorry for this poor proud fool. He wondered if he was still alive. Then the professor turned around, adjusting his hat, and told him not to worry, Lucius was still breathing. And when everyone got on board, the gangway creaked open by itself. All the students were on board and the professor personally checked their presence. After that, he asked everyone to sit and not get up. The professor was preparing a spell. The students looked at him in awe. He explained that the ship might go through turbulence during the journey, so he asked them to sit until his next announcement. Simon sat down and wondered how this ship would make it to Kizen. He couldn't see what was happening outside. The professor used his spell to surround the ship with a magical barrier. Simon thought that they would need to reverse somehow to be able to sail out to sea. The professor said to keep going. All the students heard something plop into the water. Someone suggested that it was just a big wave hitting the ship. But he was told that the sound was too loud. And then a huge whale jumped out of the water, right above the ship. Everyone was shocked. Where did the whale come from? They thought it was about to crush them. But the whale opened its mouth wide as it flew down on the ship. And it completely swallowed the ship with the frightened students inside. This giant whale was an underwater undead creature that obeyed Kizen's orders. It was a whale from the underworld. And if you look closely, you can see that it is a huge skeleton with a shell. It had a large amount of debris and other garbage in its stomach. The students wondered if they were inside the whale. And it seemed so. It was a monster that traveled the oceans around the world and attacked any port that Kizen pointed out to it. And only once a year. It transports the new students of Kizen to school. He was the high-speed transportation of Kizen. Their ship docked at a floating island. And all the students were surprised how nice it was, especially considering that they were inside a stomach. It seemed as if people lived here too. One guy came up to Simon. He told him that he was good and did a great job. Simon didn't understand what he was talking about. Then he explained that he was talking about the incident at the port, which was not a comfortable situation, but he was impressed with the way Simon had handled it. Simon replied that it was nothing special. The guy was delighted that Simon was also humble. He finally introduced himself. He was also a new student and his name was Rowan. Simon also introduced himself in return. And then a question from Rowan took him by surprise. He asked what kind of entrance exam he had. Simon didn't know what to say. But Rowan insisted. He began to tell him about his exam, how he made the darkness change shape. Simon thought that he hadn't taken any exam, that Nephthys had just come and given him an invitation letter to study and that was it. What if he got in trouble if he told the truth? So when Rowan asked what kind of exam he had, Simon lied and said that he had the same exam with the change in the shape of the darkness. Rowan was happy about this coincidence. An official announcement was made over the loudspeakers above them, calling for all students to return to the ship. They were almost at their destination. Simon could not believe it was so soon. As they climbed onto the ship, Simon noticed something strange. The water around them began to get more violent. All the students went down into the hold, but the professor stayed on deck. The waves were getting bigger every minute. The professor again created a barrier around their ship when the waves almost hit the deck. The students had been warned that it would be a little bumpy before they arrived, so they held on tight to their seats. They were told not to get up under any circumstances. Meanwhile, their ship was being tossed around like a ball with other debris on the waves. Almost all the students with their suitcases were in the air. They were all asked to hold on to the railings to avoid injury. And to be ready for any push. Simon could barely hold on to his seat. Then there was a thud and a blinding flash that blinded him. Their ship popped out like a cork from a bottle and they could see the whole island from above. It was a very breathtaking view. Simon stared mesmerized out the window while his new friend flew in the background all over the hold. Professor Siyaj clicked his rallying points, mentally controlling the magic barrier. And the ship began to rapidly approach the ground. Thanks to the barrier, the ship didn't fall as fast as it would have under gravity, but it was still fast enough. Eventually, the ship hit the water with a loud crash, but thanks to the barrier, it remained intact. It docked at the pier and the students were informed that they had arrived in Kizen. The students all approached the metal gate with guards. There they were told to line up in lines of 4. When they were done, they were given uniforms. They were each given a uniform and told that the locker rooms for girls and boys were separate. For boys on the right, for girls on the left. They were given 5 minutes to change, and then they were waiting outside. Simon looked with delight at his new uniform. Simon quickly put it on and began to look at himself in the mirror. He liked the way he looked. The uniform was stylized, just as his father had said, so he could wear it even to formal banquets. Meanwhile, the other students were discussing the properties of this uniform, and it turned out that it had a magic spell on it that made it stronger than ordinary armor in battle. They were being urged outside. They had to hurry. The guys started to come out of their locker room. All of them were kind of crumpled up. They were staring at the girls coming out from the other side, fascinated. It seemed that their uniforms were much better than theirs. Then they were going to be taken to the main auditorium. And as soon as Simon relaxed a bit, Rowan ran up behind him and started shouting at him that he looked great. And without restraint, he began to rejoice that he was finally in Kizen, asking him if this was really happening. He couldn't believe it. Everyone around him looked at him as if he was a weirdo who they felt sorry for. Simon just answered quietly and confusedly, telling him not to worry, that everything was real. After a while, Simon asked him if all these people were new students. There seemed to be a lot of them. Rowan assured him that of course, there were only 1,000 first-year students. Simon's jaw dropped in amazement. 1,000? But as Rowan knew, in the second grade, the number dropped to 300, and in the third grade, there were less than 150. Simon was shocked by this strict selection. For him, it meant that out of 1,000 students, only 30% of the best would be able to get into the second grade. That's how fierce the competition was. And there are already several of them worth watching. For example, there is Sir Nine Dark. Rowan pointed to a beautiful girl with blonde hair. She was the official heir to the Ivory Tower. And also other rising stars, all here. There's that one, Darwin Carradine, and then there's Jay Sanders. And also. But they heard a whisper from the front row. And Simon asked, who is this giant guy? He was really big. He was blocking the stage for everyone sitting behind him. But Rowan knew him, too. Châtelmaire was the name of this guy. And he was a semi-giant. Most likely he was a specialist in magic combat. No one could have beaten such a huge psycho. Then Rowan pointed him across the hall to a girl who was definitely the most capable in the entire class. It was Lorraine Archbold. She was an acquaintance of Simon's. Everyone thought she had been admitted on a special basis because she was the only daughter of Nephthys, but Rowan had heard that she had taken the entrance exam and passed with flying colors. She wasn't listed as the first or second student to take the test, but everyone already knew she was the best student in the class. One of the teachers took the stage. He asked for the students' attention and announced the beginning of the ceremony. The professor congratulated all the new students on their enrollment. And as a proud Kizen participant, he continued his speech inspiring students to study. And finally, he expected the students to do their best. They also warned them to be very careful and not to go to the local forest. Next, they were going to introduce the professors who would teach them in the first class. All of them were legendary masters in their field of necromancy. Rowan could not help but exclaim with joy that he had seen them all in magazines. They were introduced to Professor Bakil. He smiled and waved to everyone. The other professor in the background seemed to be very tired of these ceremonies. Simon applauded the professors who were introduced to him. But he noticed to himself that Nephthys was not there. Surely such a distinguished chancellor was not going to come to this boring ceremony for newcomers. It would be an honor to meet her even in the third grade. Is it really true? The host continued to lead the ceremony. Then he announced that the student representatives would now take the oath of office. All the students had to stand up from their seats. When they stood up, Simon asked Rowan if this was the final part of the ceremony. He replied that it was. The top two students, a male and female student, would come up and take the oath. Simon was curious who they could be. The presenter continued that the students whose names he called would come to the podium. The second best student was Sir Nine Dark. And she walked up to the podium to the admiring gazes of the students. And then the number one best student was Simon Valencia. He did not even realize at first that his name had been called. The huge hall was silent. The host asked if Simon Valencia was even here. And then the realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. What?